All right, welcome to the Golf Coach Podcast. Shaun, how you going, brother?
I'm well, mate. Thanks for having me on after you've been kind enough to give me some time last week on my show.
Yeah, no, thanks. No, thanks for coming on, mate. I appreciate it. For those who are listening, I jumped on Shaun's. If you follow him on socials, you'll see that I jumped on Shaun's podcast last week. It's good fun. It's good to be on the other end and get asked some questions and kind of get a little bit golf nerdy, which is nice. You know, I do like talking swing technique a lot. You know, so it was good to kind of have those conversations. What's your podcast called, Shaun? Where can they catch it?
It's called the Fairway Performance Podcast, and yeah, they'll see one of the more recent episodes was you on there, and I agree, you do get pretty nerdy with your swing talk, and you found it hard to let go of asking the questions too, because you asked me a couple of good ones on there, so that was good.
I like conversation podcasts. I really do. You know, I've been on a couple, Shaun, where I feel like it's I'm on stage, if you know what I mean, and I like podcasts where that's definitely conversational. And to me, you know, my true passion definitely is deep within swing mechanics. You know, I really do love diving into swing mechanics and to what and why certain things happen, and, you know, problem solving, Shaun, is what I say when I get people. I love problem solving, and I love working golf swing, but I understand being a golf coach, it's more than just being a golf swing coach. You know, there's a lot more to it. But, mate, so what's the story? What are you, Shaun? What's your profession, mate? What do you do?
Yeah, so it depends how far we want to go back, but I'll give you the short version of the long story. Originally, as you know, I started as an aircraft maintenance engineer for the Navy, and a few of your clients are actually ex-workmates of mine who I went through the military with, and yeah, so that's where it all started out, and I fell in love with this thing called CrossFit when I was there. And that led me down the whole health and fitness route, and, you know, sort of diving deep into that, and, you know, wanting to compete in it and doing all the fitness competitions and stuff like that, which you probably see, like the CrossFit Games and all that, like trying to go into that. And then because I enjoyed it so much, I decided that I wanted to share it with others, just like everyone who really enjoys a particular topic or has had some sort of a transformation in a field or an area. They obviously want to share that with others, and they think they can do it better than other businesses. So in my sort of early to mid 20s, I found someone else who was silly enough to put their life savings into a gym, and we fitted out a gym in Rozelle in Sydney here, or Balmain for those who don't know what Rozelle is.
Great spot.
And yeah, we owned that and I say owned because we've recently just sold it in the last sort of 2 months, but we owned that for 9 years. And then during COVID, obviously it was quite tough for service-based, in-person service-based businesses. So the gym, you know, sort of floundered around for a little bit, and I wasn't too busy with working on that. And obviously being a huge golf nut, I saw some cool transformation in myself over the years of having done a lot of like golf specific fitness type work. So, you know, lots of rotations and the power and speed work and all these types of things. And I just got asked that many times on the golf course that, you know, can you share with us what you're doing? That I decided, you know, while COVID was on, why not build an app and spend all the free hours that I have to build the programs and the movement demonstrations and the sets and reps and all that type of stuff, and package it all up into an app. And that's essentially where we are today. I've moved away from owning the gym and just full-time into doing golf fitness with people, mainly in the US and the UK is where my big client base is, and then a few from Australia as well, but doing, you know, individual coaching where I'll talk to people each and every week and day, and they'll send me videos of them doing workouts and movements and stuff, and then a lower cost option, which is the app, which a lot of people are signed up to, and they just follow programs on there and have sort of general conversations with me, like, you know, just a little DM chat in the app to ask questions and whatnot. So yeah, that's sort of where it started and where it's at.
Mate, that's pretty cool. And, you know, I heard two things in there. One, you said Rozelle Balmain area. How good is the coffee scene around there? The cafe scene there is awesome, isn't it?
Top notch, yeah.
We used to...
best coffees.
Isn't it what? We used to live in Northern Beaches up in Manly, and my wife and I, we were just partners at the time, pre-kids, and our dog was our baby, and it's all dog-friendly cafes through Balmain and Roselle there, and it's a great spot. Little Sunday markets. We used to love going there. But to get back
Yeah.
to what you're talking about, when you mention there, I'm just going to build an app, you must have some tech background or something, right? Because not many people out there, have got that go to say, I'm just going to go build an app. Like, how did you get into building an app?
Yeah, so it's not like I sat down and coded the whole thing.
Yeah.
There's lots of companies out there now where you can use their back end and white label your product within there. So that's what I've done. But I was one of the early adopters with them, and they've offered me the option to also white label it and to go into the App Store and the Google Play Store. So it's it's a web-based app, so people can download it on the internet and save the icon to their phone, or they can go through the App Store and purchase it through there. So it's not like I'm a super mega coder guy who can do like everything. I'm sort of piggybacking on the back end of those people, but I just mean in terms of like building all the programs out and a flow where clients, just from owning a gym, like I know to look for certain patterns. And as I worked with individual golf clients, I just noticed the patterns that they came in with, which was firstly, they want to know what the hell they're limited in and like where to work. So as TPI say, assess, don't guess, figure out what you need to do so that you can work on it. So there's some mobility assessments that people start with. Once they've done the mobility assessments, they can then dive into either the mobility or the strength and conditioning programs to get better at that, or to make their bodies better, or if it's just general golf fitness and health that they want to work on, there's programs for that too. And then lastly, if they've got a particular swing fault, like you would probably work with a lot of these, but early extension, flat shoulder plane, like all these different things that people can get, is not always just a cue that you can give them, because they can't just move their body in that position if the mobility or the flexibility is not there. They need to practice that in a gym setting or build strength or range of motion in that. And then when someone like yourself asks them, we want to reach this position, or you try and maneuver them, like physically maneuver them in a session, they can actually reach that position. Because if you're unable to reach that position statically or like standing there, then how the hell are you going to do it in like 1 second during a really fast golf swing, or 1.5 seconds, whatever it lasts, So
I think as well,
our body
like
needs to be able to do that.
And when you say restriction there in movement, I would also say mind and body awareness on where to move to. So like in your setting, you can create it under a certain amount of load, but also do it with a purpose and without a golf club. So you're taking out the factors of performance anxiety and things like this, just kind of focusing on the movement itself, and then kind of converting it across. I think that's, it's a really cool way of looking at it. Hey, just kind of talking to you, like from a business point of view, right? You don't want people downloading the app, do you? You want people going through the web. Is that right?
In terms of monetary,
Yeah.
Apple take a fair chunk of it.
We noticed
they've
that
got
with
a
Skillers.
small bit. Yeah, they've got a small business program where if you're turning over under $1 million, which I definitely am, then you can get 15% commission from Apple. Like they take 15% instead of the 30% that they normally take.
Yeah.
Everyone's really surprised by that, and everyone sort of does the napkin math. Yeah, they look at it and they're like, oh, you've got 300 subscribers, they pay X amount, that must mean you make this much money. And I'm like, well, if you take off the Stripe fees, if you take off the marketing I had to do that, and you take off Apple's fees, then it's actually like 65% of that money is actually what lands in my bank. And then the tax man will take some of that too. And then, so it's not a lot like the napkin math that people work out quickly in their heads.
No, I understand that. And
very different.
When people are making purchases, for people listening to this, if you're making purchases through the App Store, like what Shaun's saying there, the business owner cops a fair bit of a click. We had the same thing with gift vouchers and courses and stuff through the Skillers app that we use. So, it's just kind of an interesting one there. All right, let's get into some questions. Let's get into some topics. So today, I wanted to cover some topics, some stuff that I kind of wanted to know and some stuff that I've written down here, and I want to make this as educational as possible, right? So these are my topics I want to cover. I've got difference between mobility, flexibility, and strength, right? I want to talk to you about screenings. I want to talk to you about hip mobility exercises, thoracic mobility, rotational strength, and lower body strength, and a buzzword which is called disassociation. And I've got a few little types of little subject areas here at the end here that that I've found out last night. So can we dive into? Can you blanketly explain to me the difference between mobility, flexibility, and strength? Is there an easy way to discuss this?
Yeah, so let's put strength to the side because that's something that's separate.
Yeah.
Mobility versus flexibility. The easy way to explain this is mobility is our range of motion and our ability to move through a range of motion, and then flexibility is our length of muscles along a joint. So for anyone who's watching this, or if we put this on Insta or YouTube or whatever.
Yep.
If you were to have your thumb up, your flexibility is how far you can push your thumb back. Yeah. And your mobility is how far you can move your thumb without having the assistance of moving or pulling it back. Yeah.
Interesting.
Another way to think about it is mobility is range of motion around a joint. So think of hips, shoulders, wrists, ankles. And then flexibility is along a joint. So between your hip bone and your knee is your hamstring. So we see how flexible our hamstring is. We don't say how mobile is our hamstring. We say how flexible is it. But we say how mobile is our hip joint. So how much free range of motion do we have there? And then, so that's mobility, flexibility. Hopefully that's quite simple enough for most people.
I like it. So to talk about flexibility as well, though, and people listen to the podcast know that, I'm extremely passionate about health and fitness. And we just had Mr. Ian O'Dwyer on recently, who's like, the king in human movement outside of golf, right? I think I was the most underqualified person in the world to actually interview him, right? But I kept up with the podcast and got lots of great feedback from it. Lots of golf coaches really enjoyed it. When you talk about flexibility there of the hamstring, we're also got to talk about the discussion between fascia and tissue in between those joints, right? That then the connectedness there to try and help. If we can get that to be free and moving as well, then that obviously helps with the flexibility of the hamstring as well, right? Because that's a big one, right?
Yeah. So fascia essentially is. So if you were to grip onto your top of your hand and just run that skin through your fingers, so fascia almost sits on top of your muscle and in between your skin layer. So it can either sort of grip into there and be sort of taut, or it can be a little more fluid. If you're hydrated, the fascia is going to move a little more freely. And if you're just tight in general, it's probably going to have not moved that much across the skin, so it's probably going to be a little tighter. So ways in which you can do flexibility work and fascia work at the same time is to do something like foam rolling, where you're actually agitating it and actually like promoting blood flow through it by moving it, or like percussion devices, so using like the hyper ice or those types of guns where you're shooting your leg and the vibration is going through it. So I generally for talking about fascia and stuff, it's very it's very in the weeds and like very granular. Like it's quite difficult for most people to comprehend. So I generally just stick to the flexibility thing and like spending more time, lengthening the hamstrings up. And that's going to give most people the best bang for buck. If it's an athlete, then maybe we can go down the route of talking about fascia and other bits and pieces. But for the general population, they're probably not doing enough anyway to notice any difference.
Yeah, and I would also, when you talk about the movement of fascia there, right, in the flexibility of the hamstring as well, like hydration is so important, right?
Yeah, important for many things. Important for one, just like your general function. Our whole body is predominantly made up of water. I can't remember what percentage it is, but it's like quite a high percentage.
Yeah.
And every sort of 1%, 2%, 3% that we're underhydrated, there's cognitive effects. There's physical effects of amount of power that you can output, your mobility. There's just so many different things that can be affected by it. And actually I was talking to, and this is one of the things when I was talking to the guy who does a lot of work with John Rahm and helped John Rahm a lot in his on-course stuff. He was actually saying hydration was a big part of what they were doing, talking about when he was eating during a round and how much fluid he was having. And it turned out he just wasn't drinking much water at all. And now just being hydrated, his performance has improved significantly.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. So let's talk about, flexibility and mobility. So how can we get, let's talk about two, I guess, cases around mobility. You mentioned hip joint there, right, which we are going to go down to lower a bit in the next couple of topics. But if you can talk about how we can increase mobility and how we can increase flexibility.
Yeah, so I like to think of them as two separate arenas. So with mobility, I like to not only increase our range of motion, so I don't want to just make sure that you can move it more freely. So as an example, like having someone pull you into different hip stretches so that you're actively getting pulled into each position. I want you to be able to control that yourself. So for anyone that's watched the videos of me online or other people where they're doing the exercise called the 90-90 hip switch, where essentially your knees are out in front of you and your legs are at 90 degrees and you're switching sides over with your hips. So if you can picture that in your head, I know it's a little bit tough, but that's me actively using the muscles in my legs to pull myself between the two positions. So not only have I got mobility, but I've also got strength and control through that range of motion, because obviously with a golf swing, we need strength and control through the ranges of motion that we build in order to be able to swing the club, because otherwise we just won't be able to put power into it. For flexibility, I like to, and mobility, sorry, just to tie a bow on that, that can be done at any time because it's fairly dynamic. So it's stuff that you can do before a round, after a round, whatever. It's dynamic movement. So we're moving between two positions or moving, doing big hip circles or shoulder circles or anything like that.
Okay.
And moving the joint through its range of motion. So do it any time because it's active and dynamic. If someone really needs to work on their flexibility, then I like them to do it as, after their round of golf or, maybe the night before they're playing the next day or the next afternoon or whatever, and sit in those positions for longer. Because obviously if we're, we're seated right now, so our hips are in some sort of a contracted state, or our hip flexors are being put in a position where they're not fully lengthened. So however long we spend in this position, we should also be countering that with some sort of static stretch to, counteract that. So if we spent 1 hour sitting, then we could spend 1 hour with our hips open. I think this is a reason a lot of people, when they have standing desks, actually get a lot of benefit from it. They feel more mobile and everything because they're just spending like 50-50 of their time seated and standing. So they're undoing a little bit of that. But that stuff, doing it passively and doing it in a yin yoga style, where you're breathing and falling deeper into the stretch, I find that super beneficial for guys and girls who need to work on, their flexibility.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, breathing into. So when you talk about the yin yang type of situation, my wife had acute neck injury recently, right? Through I think it was up through the upper part of her spine, and we were kind of doing some, she got some osteo work, but doing lots of breathing exercises where kind of, we're holding the position, then breathing out, relax, and then getting deeper. Breathing out, relax, and getting deeper. And I think, when people think about, I think static stretching these days is getting a little bit of a, ooh, don't do it, it's not as good as you think it should, but there's definitely a place for it if you can incorporate the breath and try and get deeper and deeper into it. I truly still believe there is a big place for it. Why did you mention there, Shawnee, that flexibility training the day before or after the round? Why not prior?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That's sort of what I was going to tap into anyway. The reason we want to do dynamic and active stuff before we play, or pre-round or as close to a round as possible, is obviously active is moving the tissues through a range of motion and joints through a range of motion they're going to be used in. And active warm-ups are just, there's numerous studies, I'm not going to quote specific ones, but they're just proven to assist with your power output and help you, increase your power output from the first hole. So, lots of people will be like, oh, I'm not warmed up until the third hole. If they just did some mobility before they started, they'd be warmed up and prepped for the first hole. And then also within those same studies, they've had, the active stretches or dynamic stretches. They've had the control group who did either something or nothing, and then obviously the group who did the static stretches. And they just found that the power output in the static stretches was just significantly lower than what the active ones were. So in terms of a golf swing, we need to be ready and powerful, not slow and, tortoise-like before we go and hit a golf ball. So
that was a big thing about like 10 years ago in the weightlifting world, about when, or maybe even longer now, is that, we started to poo-poo static stretching before, started to work out that it was not optimizing moving the mass around when the person was, after static stretching in a more flexible state. I'm not using, great lingo there, but that's kind of, the thing that was going around in the gym was like, hey, stop doing your stretches before you're doing a squat, that was a big conversation amongst all the trainers probably 15 years ago now when I was at Fitness First up in DY. Yeah, so that's obviously gone
also,
into the same thing with the golf.
Yeah. And if you think about it, essentially with outputting power, whether it's rotational or even just jumping, there's some sort of stretch and contract element, right? So we need that elastic element of our muscles to be working. If we just go and hold our muscles, so if you had an old rubber band, and you just went and held it in that position for a period of time, and then you came back to it and then tried to do this, it would have to lengthen further out in order to do it, and it just wouldn't have as much snap to it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you had a rubber band and you were just doing this, like that active type stuff, and then you kept it still and then went straight back to it, it'd be like a little warmed up and it would be like primed to move a bit better. So think about your muscles and stuff like that. You want it to be primed and ready, not like held in a position, and then go back and try and do the fast, open, close or contract, relax type thing.
Well, and I like to use certain terminology, what Shaun's talking about there, right, is that when you pull something really long, right, so you got long and short. If you pull something really long, it's not going to generate as much power as, and that kind of elastic pop, as opposed to when something's maybe a little shorter, a little tighter, but it's primed up and it's ready and it's safe and it's still kind of popping out the energy. Like people who are kind of long and loose versus like a stocky kind of type of person, right? And we see that in with children. Like when you see a child swinging a golf club versus I teach like a lot of like ex-professional surfers and stuff like that who are really tight through the back, right? So you can see the differences in just the length of how far they can swing that club around. And then kids, with the kids, you're like, just put the brakes on it, but you just can't, like I talk about, shortening up a kid's backswing, you're just banging your head against a wall, in my opinion, and I say that in a kind way, but there's obviously certain case studies, but, for instance, for me, in a coaching terminology, people listening out there, when kids swing long, the club will generally get kind of across the line and then the club will fall under in the downswing. So the swing direction will go more to the right. So when, in my situation with about half a dozen kids I got who are just long and loose, I just learned how to manage that swing direction out to the right. And once they get stronger and I guess the ability to be able to hold certain positions a little bit better and let's use the term strength, right? Let's use it as they get stronger. Then I can start to get the swing direction to go a little bit more to the left and then start to manage a little bit, if that makes sense to people out there. But alrighty, so let's just leave strength out of it. I really like that difference between mobility and flexibility. I think, we all learn a lot there. Can we just, I might say the next subject area for last, because we kind of touched on it before. Can we jump into hip mobility exercises? And before we get into hip mobility, right, I think there's a big misconception out there as well with people. People associate pelvis turn and hip turn as the same thing, right? Can you tell me, like, when we talk about hips and pelvis within the golf swing, right? So pelvis, to me, pelvis rotation or pelvis turn, right, is when we say the trail leg loses flexion in the backswing, so it goes more extended, right? That causes the pelvis to kind of turn. We therefore as well have the ability to get kind of more internal hip rotation. Do you see where I'm kind of going with this, Shawnee? Like, can you tell
Yeah,
me
yeah.
can you explain to us the differences there, or?
Yeah, so they need to work in sync. So your pelvis will it has anterior and posterior tilting. Yep. So the pelvis will tilt, and then the ball and socket joint in the hip is what will rotate. And it's through a combination of both of those that we get, hip rotation or pelvic rotation or whatever people want to say.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, we need to coordinate the muscles and have the ability of the joint to be mobile enough to move through that range of motion. So it comes down to one, having the range of motion, two, then having the strength to do that, and also the coordination to do that. So that's where I think you mentioned it at the start there, or maybe we just chatted about it before we started recording about dissociation.
Yeah.
And it's one of the really big things for me in screening. So when I do movement screenings on golfers, any professionals that I've worked with, or people who just have really good coordination, or they're good golfers, like elite amateur sort of golfers, they have really good ability to dissociate. So they can move their upper body completely independent of their lower body. And then their pelvic turn during the golf swing is just much better than amateurs who are, sort of higher handicaps, like 5, 10, 15, 20 sort of handicappers or higher. They just have a little less control over that. And it comes down to a few things. So in the screenings that I run through, we test multiple things. We test for lower body or lower quarter rotation. So we're testing internal, external rotation of the hips. We're testing anterior, posterior tilt of the pelvis. So whether you can do that or whether it's like really shaky or disjointed. So think of like if you were to do a cat-cow stretch, like you're on all fours and you're trying to just flatten and arch the lower back. That's essentially what we're doing, like the worm with the lower back. Then we want to test whether we can rotate the torso independent of the pelvis, and then we want to test that we can keep the torso stable and then rotate the pelvis around. So that tests stability and mobility. And then, that's all the tests really that are testing that, hip and pelvis rotation. So
let's kind of go through a couple of those there, right? Anterior and pelvic tilt, right? So people listening to this, do you want to explain to them the difference between those two tilts?
Anterior and posterior.
Yeah, posterior. Yeah, sorry. Mate.
Yeah. So that's just arching and flattening the back. So if you were to stand there and I talk about, or if you're doing a TPI test with me, then you'll essentially start in a 5-iron posture without holding the golf club. So just picture yourself holding a 5-iron, and then can you flatten your lower back? So for lack of a better description, and something that will probably make some people laugh and some people go, what an idiot. But think of turning your pelvis under, or turning your hips underneath your low back, sort of like a dog is trying to hump a pole, and then bringing your hips back. So that's anterior, posterior. Going between those two is anterior, posterior. Obviously, post is back, so moving it backwards. Anterior is going under.
It's funny that
that's anterior, posterior.
You use that analogy. I use different analogy. But
yeah,
they might not get promoted through YouTube if I use those types of words that I use. But so like for males, if you're pointing, what down a little lower, what up a bit higher, like if you're trying to do that at the same time, that's kind of the difference between the two tilts. And from a golf coaching perspective as well, and a movement perspective within the just talk about the backswing as well, just from a technique point of view. If you're too anterior tilted, so you've got this kind of curvature in the bottom of your spine, right? It really limits the ability on how much you can actually move your pelvis in rotation-wise in the backswing as well. And the same goes if you're too posterior. So if it's kind of looking too far upward, I'll find that person kind of moves closer to the ball in the backswing. So not only has it got... it's important to have your pelvis tilted correctly in the golf swing to kind of obviously match you personally from a, mobility and strength situation within the golf swing or club head speed. But it's also to be technically correct. It's really important as well, because I find the body searches for balance, Shaun, Like, so if if you're not balanced correctly, as in the pelvis not tilted correctly, say it's too anterior tilted, then in the backswing it'll move more posterior as the the body searches for balance, if you know what I mean. And from
Yep.
there, it can cause us to kind of get a little bit offline. So that's the difference between anterior tilt and posterior tilt. So people listening, kind of just the pelvis moving, up and down in that forward fashion we mentioned. You mentioned something that I want to educate people on. Can you explain to us like what internal and external hip rotation is?
Yeah. So so internal rotation of the hips is a really important one, and one that I find a lot of, and they've researched and studied this as well. But if you're limited in internal rotation in the lead hip of your golf swing, then a lot of those, I don't know what percentage, don't quote me on that, but there's a very high percentage of people who have limited internal rotation on their lead hip, that will develop back pain, low back pain, or just back pain in their swing. Because the rotation is limited there, something else has to take over, which is generally the low back. So if we think about a right-handed golfer, our left leg is our lead leg. If we go into our backswing, we are internally rotating our right hip. So we're turning into our backswing, and our right hip is internally rotated. Yep, to some degree. As we come into our downswing, our left leg is posting up. So just like we talked about in the podcast, our weight starts to shift forward into the left leg. We start to drive harder into the ground, so more weight is being put in there to become a stable base to rotate around. And then we're rotating internal, or the hip is rotating internally as our body turns into that hip. Yep. That, if we can't do that, or we're limited there, then something takes over, which I was saying, which is the low back in a lot of instances, and we start to arch the lower back out, or something changes, and it puts all the load through there rather than the hips being able to rotate and having the mobility to rotate into that position. So this is coming back to what I was saying before. We need the mobility, but we also need the strength. So if we can pull ourselves into that position, just like you can pull your thumb into a certain position, that you have the mobility to do that, then we're going to run into less problems than, to use your analogy, or not analogy, but description with the kids. You're trying to rein them in from moving too far. They have too much mobility. They're too mobile. They need to be tightened up a little bit and shortened a bit, right? For most people, they don't need that tightening or shortening because they already have that from sitting and being adults and working all day. We need to be more mobile so we can reach that position. So yeah,
and
internal's the lead hip.
Yes. So the yes. Okay. So left, the lead hip goes internal and the trail hip goes external in the swing. So in the backswing, in the downswing. Sorry. Yes, in the downswing. I feel when I take, like, I do a little bit of, like, hip mobility kind of stretches, holding the club out in front of me, right, and just kind of wiggling around my hips and stuff. I can really feel my trail hip dig in. You know what I mean? I can feel it, like it's digging in, like when it's reaching its full range of motion, like when I'm doing my exercise. And there's also a way that we see that, like, I think if you watch Minwoo Lee closely as well, you can see he's got a lot of it, right? And it's like this slinging motion as well that hip can create. It's like a sling, if you know what I mean. So, pelvic rotation around, but if you can get those hips to, that trail hip to kind of internally rotate on the way back. That's what you're saying. That's internally on the way back, isn't it? In the backswing, the trail hip.
The trail hip is internal, yeah.
Yeah, internally rotate. You get that, can kind of dig in there. I really reckon you can get this kind of, I've got no science behind this, right, guys? But I can feel this kind of like slinging motion come into play.
Yeah, so just to draw from another sport, so and this will also talk to external rotation. So in weightlifting circles, so when you watch the Chinese versus a Western or a European type weightlifting, the Chinese and the Asian countries, some Asian countries will use internal rotation as a bit of a slingshot, or to help them. And that's because they can bounce against the limits of their internal rotation of whatever joint it is, whether it's shoulders or hips. So when you see someone squat, if they, have their feet set and they're pointing straight, they turn their toes out slightly. And then as you squat down, you keep your knees over your toes. you actively have to push your knees outwards, or feel like you're pushing them outwards, as if I've got my hand on either side of your knee on the outside of them, and you're trying to push your knees out to touch my hands as you squat down. That's externally rotating your hips. Yeah. What the Chinese will do is it's called valgus knee, so where they're starting to cave in. A lot of people say it's really bad, but some people you'll see they'll land in the bottom of a squat in a clean or a snatch, their knees will cave in, and then they sort of almost as they drive their knees out, they bounce against that. So one, you can say that's pushing to the limit of their internal rotation, and then making sure that they engage their glutes as they externally rotate their hips to drive out of the squat.
Yeah.
So there's different schools of thought with that, but it can be used to your benefit if you understand movement really well and whatnot.
Yeah, and I was with you on that, right? That journey of you kind of just, educating on us on that, but geez, there's a lot of pressure on the internal rotators of the hip there, right? Like a lot of pressure to get that initial sling out and then get into the glute. Like anyways, that's a topic for another area, but that's crazy. All right, can you give me some hip mobility exercises?
Yeah, the the best way for people to get
Yes.
to get videos for this, because I'm going to try and describe it, but you can either go to my YouTube channel where you can just search for all the stuff, and it's just my name, Shaun Diachkoff, or type in Fairway Performance on YouTube. Or on my website, fairwayperformance.com, I literally just made a blog post, which is 7 best hip mobility exercises, or you can get through it through my Instagram. There's heaps of different links, and you can probably chuck in the show notes as well.
I saw all that. That's where the kind of desire to kind of bring it up came from. And geez, you put a lot of stuff out there for free. Gosh.
Yeah. So there's all these, there's 7 different exercises that are really good, but essentially
Give me your best 3.
with the hips. Yeah, so with the hips, we want to take them through as large a range of motion as possible. So as large an internal, external range of motion as we can. My favorite one, and the one that most people get the most bang for their buck and benefit from, is the 90-90 hip switch. So that's where you're seated down on your bum and you're sort of using your legs like windscreen wipers in front of you, and they're bent at 90 degrees, and you're just rotating side to side, sort of like windscreen wipers. The 90-90 hip switch. Yeah, very tough. I think in that video I talk a little bit about different variations for it. So if someone's just starting out, they can lean back a lot and not support their weight too much, and sort of not worry about where their bum's sitting on the ground, and literally just move as far as they can. And then sort of gold standard, you'd progress up, and then gold standard would be seated as upright as possible, not moving your bum off the ground, and just being able to move the knees side to side. So that involves strength, coordination, and mobility to be able to do that. And it feels like, even for me, and I do that a lot with demonstrations for people, for making videos online, all that sort of stuff. Even for me, it still feels pretty pinchy, because I'm doing what I'm doing right now for a lot of the day as well, which is sitting down and taking away mobility, right?
Yeah.
So that would be my first one. And then the other 2 that I really love are a seated, a kneeling and a standing hip circle. So the standing hip circle is the easier of the 2, where you just have like a golf club or 2 in front of you as like little walking sticks or canes, like to balance with. And then pretty much you're raising your knee straight up in front of you. So your knee's straight out in front and your heel is straight under your knee. And then if it's your right leg, you're trying to draw a big circle or as wide a circle as you can around to behind you as far as you can, and then bringing your heel towards your butt. So we're trying to draw a big, big circle, picturing you've got a crayon on the end of your knee, like a Mr. Wiggles nose.
Yep.
You're trying to draw a big circle around, and then going back that same way. And that's taking us through a large range of motion, and also requiring strength to do it. The next option for that to be the third exercise, and slightly harder because it involves a bit more mobility, because we've got a little less range of motion with our legs, is to do that in a kneeling position. So start kneeling and then raise your leg out in front of you, and then because you've got to keep your leg lifted as you rotate your hip around to the side, you've got to keep your heel off the floor from scraping on the ground, and then bring it around behind you. So without double checking the blog post, I'm pretty sure all 3 of those exercises are on there. Because if they're not, I should have taken a good hard look at myself. But you'll see all the demos and stuff on there.
And for people listening, in regards to, if you want to get into mobility exercises, or if you want to get into, getting into the gym, and the great thing is, Shawnee, I get a message once a week from someone saying, you encourage me to get into the gym. I listen to your podcast, and I'm a keen golfer, and you've encouraged me to go to the gym, and that just makes me so excited. That makes me happier than anything because, you know, health is so important. It's so important to us. And, I saw a statistic come up in the Western world that by 2050, no, in 10 years' time, 50% of the population is going to be obese. Now, I have nothing against people who are or whatever, but to me, it's around about, I think it's people in powerful positions like us, like in podcasts or, in YouTube, or who have this big reach. We've got a responsibility because we are not governed by big pharma or any of these other type of situations, right? Where we can give out real advice and help people get healthier. So where I was getting at with the kind of start of that, right, is that for me, when I started doing my hip mobility work and I started working on my hamstring strengthening and lengthening exercises, my ability, I used to practice this roundhouse kick right at the gym, Shaun, at Anytime Fitness late at night when no one was watching. And when I started the journey, I used to put a foam roller up. People are looking at a foam roller. I can't give you the height of it. Let's just call it 5 foot, right? A foam roller. And I could barely get my foot over it and kick it, right? After a month of training at the gym, not much of just hip work and hamstring work, every now and then at the end of my routine, I ended up putting like yoga block, another yoga block, a bottle of drink, and I can now get my heel over my head after my exercises. And I'm not saying that to give people any like, oh, whatever, but like praise or whatever, but that just, your ability to have such good movement in your hips and your hamstrings, gosh, it makes quality of life so good, Shaun, because it helps you with your posture, your movement. It just makes you, I reckon those two things for me, hamstrings and hip mobility, improve my quality of life like crazy. Don't you agree?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Everyone's all about improving the quantity of their life. Like, we all want to live longer, but there's no point in living longer if the last 20 years is, shithouse quality.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, like if, I would rather die at 80, still being able to do what I can do now, than living to 85 and spending the last 5 years in, palliative care or something. So, so a lot of people sort of have asked on different podcasts that I've been on, like, what's my why for training? And one of the things that I shared ages ago, which was pretty powerful, and lots of people sort of reached out and was like, shit, yeah, like that sounds awesome, was I never want to have my physical abilities hinder me from doing something that a friend asked me to do. I want to have the choice to say no, because I either want to do it or not do it. What I mean by that is I always want my body to be in a reasonable condition, not always the fittest and healthiest it's always been, but have good mobility, good strength, good general fitness, good general health, all that type of thing, so that if my friends asked me to do a Tough Mudder, I would be able to say yes or no based on the fact that I could do it.
Yeah.
Not as a complete, whiz of the sport and win the event, but just that my body would be able to get through it. And sure, I'd be sore and tired and everything else like everyone would, but I could say no to it because I don't want to do it, or I could say yes to it because I have the ability to do it. So that's sort of my why behind training. And I think...
Ready for anything.
Yeah, I think if people... Yeah, I think if people approached training like that, just as like little... like building the World Trade Center again. If you're not going to start by going to the 50th floor and then dropping a whole bunch of bricks and hoping they all stand there, you're going to start with the brick at the bottom floor, and you're going to spend years building it so that you've got it, and it's going to, last a long time. It's going to stay there for a while. Good foundation, solid base.
I like that way you like it. I've got two, right? One is that I had an old guy at the gym the other day come up to me, like an older gentleman, and said something to me, and he said something nice to me, right? He's like, oh, wow, you're doing something, whatever there, right? Having conversation started. And I said, you're the goal. This guy's in his 60s, and he's not using age as an excuse. And he's bouncing around like Spider-Man in the gym. You know what I mean? And so I hate the age as an excuse thing, but also for my kids. I love taking my oldest to the gym, and... I got a video the other day from my son's daycare, and his educator, she's awesome, right? I love her. She's awesome. And she said, and Billy started doing push-ups in the gym. And sorry, in the daycare. And she said, "Oh, you're doing push-ups." She goes, "How many can you do?" And he goes, "My daddy can do heaps." And I went, "Yeah, good on you, son." Like it's great. And he loves going to the gym. I set up obstacle courses, but that's one thing for my family. But the next thing is for when I'm older. That's what I'm really passionate about is living by example and not setting excuses for age. Like I want to be able to, if my son, is playing first grade soccer, I want to be able to run. I want to be able to keep up with him, by the time he's doing that. I'd like to play in the same soccer team as him one day or something, I think that'd be really cool. Alrighty, let's I'm gonna skip the one just there because we're getting a little bit longer than I thought, like getting through these. Can you talk to me about rotational strength? What is it and how can we improve it?
Yeah, so there's lots and lots of different ways. There's a big can of worms, obviously. So let's look at a couple of basic things first. So first and foremost, I believe that everyone should have a decent amount of unilateral strength. So unilateral being the ability to do like a single leg lunge or like lunge onto one leg and then lunge onto the other, and there'd be a good amount of balance between the strength in those two.
So
Or we could do
unilateral
reverse lunges or...
So what is
So
unilateral?
unilateral is just one-sided.
One-sided. Okay, so when you're saying
think
that
of
a one-legged
lunge,
lunge. Yeah.
Yeah. Or so a lunge is always on one leg,
Oh,
but whether we step forwards and do a lunge, or whether we step back and do a lunge, or have a 10-kilo dumbbell in each hand, or have one leg on a box and step up onto it, just any sort of exercise like that we can do under control with a little bit of loading for multiple repetitions, so that we have equal amount of strength in both sides and there's not too much of a disparity in both sides. Then and only then, once you've got a good amount of unilateral strength, we start to incorporate bilateral exercises. So that's where we'll do 2 feet planted on the ground. We'll have a bar on our back or on our front or over our head and do a front squat, back squat, overhead squat. So some sort of strength work where we're using both sides in unison, together to accomplish the goal of lifting the weight, and there's no real big imbalance there. Now, once we have a solid foundation of that, then we can start looking at things like rotational strength. So we can talk about doing like static type ones where we're doing like obliques, so like dumbbell side bends or exercises like this to just build some strength in the obliques and the side of the core. Then obviously you've got your straight up and down sit-ups through flexion and extension of the spine. So doing, sit-ups or crunches or bicycle kicks or flutter kicks or whatever it might be. And then we can go up into doing exercises which are actually rotating. And we can think of rotational exercises in 2 ways. So we can think about them as concentric, so where we're contracting the muscle as in like in order to like do it fast and rotate around, or we're doing an exercise where we're trying to resist rotation. So 2 examples of this would be if I was to stand at 90 degrees to the cable machine and I had my hands out to my side, sort of like you would be in the top of your backswing, but you put them out at horizontal to your body or horizontal to the floor, and then you're pretty much grabbing the cable and just rotating it to either in front of you or all the way to the side of you, and then back to the start. So that's a rotational exercise, taking you through eccentric and concentric phase. So that's a rotational thing. Then if we talk about anti-rotation, that's where we're isometrically holding. So we would pull the cable to in front of us, then we would pull our hands to our chest, push our hands out from our chest again, hold it for a second or 2, and then go back. So we're having to contract and hold and resist the rotation trying to pull us back. So that's how I sort of break up core exercises or rotational exercises, and there's no like one size fits all, because some people will need to start with some and then some people will need to start with others. But before people just go, ripping into like just fucking caning themselves with, rotational stuff, build a little bit of strength through unilateral, bilateral, and then start going to the other rotational stuff, because what you'll find is by holding onto dumbbells, you're having to do some sort of bracing of the core, or having a barbell on your back, there's some sort of bracing of the core. So we're building a little bit of core strength there, and ability to brace up before you start ripping and going sideways, or rotating around. So
I think that's some really sound advice there. Now, when you talk about bracing the core there at the end, if you just grab one weight, right, doesn't matter what it is, if it's a 5 kilo washing detergent thing, right, and put it in one hand, right, and you're holding that weight, if you look in the mirror and try to keep yourself balance, so keep your shoulders level, your pelvis level, your knees level, everything level, you are bracing one side of the core to be able to do that. And so if you can you can even do that in just walking exercises. So if you're looking to just improve your core, you don't have to have two weights in both hands. It's actually beneficial to have weight in one hand as you're walking, because you're bracing the other side to do it, right? And what do you think, Shawnee? Like, for instance, for me, I've been doing a lot of study, right? But just a lot of interesting stuff. And I'm always, in my spare time looking at this type of stuff. And, a gentleman who is, like, I guess the guru, who actually invented the term core, his name is Paul Chek in America. Fitness expert, he started coaching Olympians back like in the 70s, right? And he invented the term core. He talks about with doing, let's call it core exercises, right? Whenever we're doing a sit-up, we want to try and do it from a more extended position as possible. So our spine is curved in a negative way, right? Not flat to the ground, because when we keep doing a sit-up, what we're doing a lot of time is we're shortening up our abdominal muscles. So our abdominal muscles are getting shorter and shorter and shorter, like when we're building a bicep muscle, right? Shorter and shorter and shorter. And he talks about it's very, very important to be lengthening those at the same time. So I think you use the term eccentric, whatever it is, when it's staying open, because it's really important with our core. We want to strengthen, look after our organs, but we also want to protect our breathing. So I think it's it's a really interesting subject area that I came across lately in regards to that. We're doing what you use the term, is it bilateral exercise, or working up and down?
Or working up and down would just be moving in a certain plane of motion. Bilateral just sort of refers to having two legs, or a two-handed push-up versus a one-handed push-up would be unilateral. What you're saying there, so 100% agree with what you're saying. Like, that's a very good context behind why you would do that. If you think back to what I was talking about before, where I was talking about as large a range of motion and being strong through that range of motion as possible, if we have our spine extended to its limit or very close to its limit, and then we contract our abs fully through that full range of motion, then we're building our ab strength through that full range of motion of our spine, essentially. So from an extended position all the way to there. What it also is really good at is when you were talking before about anterior, posterior tilting of the pelvis and just your lack of ability to rotate there, what I find, a lot of golfers will have it with their thoracic spine. So they'll either be in a C or an S posture. So a C posture is like where they're really curved over, or an S posture is where they're so like a hunchback is a C, and then an S is where they're like sort of arching their back as if like I don't know, like like between
they're pinching their shoulder
like
blades,
arching it out. Yeah, pinching their shoulder blades together and pushing their butt back. Creating like a little hollow in their back there. So if you are not neutral, so when we talk about neutral spine, all we're talking about is finding where the end range is in one way and then the end range is in another way, and then finding somewhere towards the center. Because if we're in the center, then we have the ability to rotate further, whether it's like the hips and whatever else, or our thoracic, and I find thoracic the main one. But if we're in an S or a C posture, it's really hard to get much rotation out of it. Huge. So if you're someone who's really if you're really hunched over in your swing, you're probably going to find it really hard to rotate around too much. So a cool drill, and even something that you could, I would suggest you try with clients, is when they're in that posture, just say, cool, I want you to arch your back out as much as you can. Now I want you to go back to round it as far as you can. Now where's somewhere in the middle? awesome. That's where you're going to start your golf swing from, in that position, and let's go from there. And that's a good way to do a physical cue or a tactile cue without actually touching someone, in order to get them to find the center, because they themselves will automatically go back to somewhere in the middle there.
Yeah.
They won't go to what the original position was. So sorry, that just sidetracked it a little bit, but it just brought that up, and hopefully that can paint a bit of a picture in people's heads as to that.
And from a golf professional, like people listening, if you want a case study in regards to what he's talking about there about rotation, and the alignments of the spine at setup position, right? So a lot of curvature through the upper back, or the exact opposite where the back is really, really extended, like they're pinching their shoulder blades back. Well, that's the second one I talk about there, pinching the shoulder blades back. I heard a very similar case study that's happened recently, is Will Zalatoris. So Will Zalatoris has gone through those back injuries, and he has a really straight up back there. So think about this, right? In our backswing, we want our spine to rotate and extend. If it's already extended, you're not going to get much out of it. You know what I mean? So back to
something has to take over.
Yeah. Yeah, good point.
Sorry to interrupt there, but something has to take over, because we're still trying. Yeah, we're still trying to rotate, right? So what's the general culprit when one part doesn't work and we're in rotation and we want to extend further in our spine and our upper back can't do it? It's generally going to go to the lower back. Yeah, and where do people complain about pain the most? To their lower back. Yeah, so just on that, it's something I posted about last week, is a lot of people, the lower back gets a really bad rep for being weak, or people want exercises to target making it stronger. But it's, I don't know how to say this in like not a slightly mean way, but it's like you don't know what you're talking about because you haven't assessed your body. You need to assess where the restrictions are, which is causing the referral to that pain, because it's obviously, or not obviously, it's not always the site of the pain which is the cause of the problem. That's just a referral from something else. So it can be your hips being tight, your thoracic being tight, your thoracic being too extended in the setup position. They can all refer to the lower back in some way, because there's so many moving parts in a golf swing. So it just comes back to it. Assess it, don't guess it. A swing coach can help, or someone like myself doing a movement screening can help with that.
Yeah, so the terminology that I use there, Shawnee, right, is pain teacher. Like I've got pain teachers in my body as well, and it's definitely not the source of the pain or where it's coming from. You know what I mean? It's telling me that's something else. And, I've got similar things with me as well. A lot of it is in my kind of neck or jaw, wherever I get it, my upper thoracic as well. Like I stretch my lower abdominals out and my thoracic ends up being more relaxed. Like it's crazy, right? Like it's how it's all connected. But back to rotational strength, right? And so you were pretty big there on, just to kind of put a cap on that, is that it's very important that we kind of build a baseline of strength before we just kind of start hammering rotational strength.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, start off with some unilateral stuff. Start off with doing each side, then build to bilateral, so using both sides, doing squats. Just with that, you're going to get, if you're holding onto some weights, or even if you're not really holding some weights, you're still maintaining a posture while you go through those different positions. But if you do have a weight on your back when you're doing those squats, you're going to have some sort of bracing element with your midline to hold that weight on your back. And then you're going to go into doing the rotational stuff and probably run into less problems.
Okay.
If you're already someone who's well trained, then sure, you can go into rotational stuff, just take it slow and build up, what do we call it? Progressively overload the movement as you go through it. But yeah, just take your time with the rotational stuff. Because like I said, if we have a problem with extension or something else, our lower back's going to cop it. And it's going to cop it in this because we're doing a lot of movements in the gym, right? 4 sets of 10 each side, 3 sets of 10 each side. That's 30 rotations each side. So 60 rotations in total, which is similar to what you would do for a golf swing. But it's not a 300-gram club that we're holding. It's a 5 to 10 kilo weight potentially that we're holding onto, or 1 to 2 kilo weight, which is 3 to 6 times the golf club, a driver.
Yeah, and I find that, when I do some rotational exercises, I do them at the end of my core workout, it's quite surprising that if I stay in complete proper form and engage before I move, how light the weight actually needs to be. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
I can, if I'm
doesn't need to be
holding
heavy.
if I'm holding the cable machine out in front of me, like what Shaun was saying. So if you're holding your two hands like you're about holding a golf club, but your arms are horizontal or level with the ground. And when I go to brace and pull the cable out, right, I can muscle the goddamn thing out of there. I can do my shoulders, I can pull the thing out of there. But if I want to pull it out with my core, which I can feel that next, I did it a couple of days ago, but it's actually it's not as heavy as you need to be, because what Shaun and I touched on there previously is what's so important when training is range of movement. And please, please, please do not compromise the exercise by shortening it to try and move the weight. Make sure you can keep it as length as possible, in my opinion, when doing it.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so let's get into some just topic areas here, right? I'm very big on people listening to this app, right? Is that I feel listen to this podcast, right? And, on the podcast before this one here, I had Mr. Craig Dixon from, data scientist from Draw More Circles, an absolute freak in how he puts science in every day of his life, right? And data. And it's just incredible, right? And I feel like it's my due diligence to teach people health and fitness as well as golf swing stuff, but also the data side of golf, right? And to me, I'm really, really big on tracking progress, like any business should be, right? But like our golf game, we should be tracking progress. That's why I'm big on that. Can you tell me what tools do you use, or what tools can people use, like alternative stuff, to tracking their progress in the gym? Now, does this also kind of mean it depends on what that person is trying to get in the gym? If it's kind of gaining more strength or gaining more mobility, how important is it tracking it, and how can we?
Yeah, so I mean, you've got basic methods, which is for the lower cost app like mine, you are getting the sets and reps given to you, and it's telling you what to do each and every day, and you're inputting the amount of weight that you lift or the amount of reps that you use, or the amount of reps that you do, sorry, and then obviously, if we are following the program to a T and we're progressing either the weight or the repetitions, we can see that we're improving over time. Some apps have cool like graphs and all that sort of stuff to show you that you're improving and whatnot. Mine's not quite that advanced yet, but you can see the previous results that you've lifted, so you know what to do for the next week, and you can leave notes and all that sort of stuff. So that's the bare basic one that, in my opinion, everyone should be doing, because we want to, in order to get something from following a strength and mobility or speed and power program, whatever it might be, you need to have progressive overload if we're going to make the body better than what it was the day before or the week before, the month before, whatever. Obviously, at the start, that's going to be really rapid progress, and it's going to be cool to see the numbers jump really quickly, but at some point it's going to stagnate. So then we change the movements or change the repetitions or stimulus that we're giving to the body for, what it is, whether it goes from a strength and hypertrophy type focus to a speed and power focus. We can start setting new PBs because we're doing it slightly differently, and we're, increasing again, and then we go back to the strength and we're increasing again. And so there's all this cool stuff. Even I make PBs in the gym, and I've been training. I'm 36 now, and I've pretty much been training since I was like 16, 17 in the gym at home in the garage with the old York plastic coated weights.
Yeah.
And I still set PBs in squats and deadlifts of different variants. It's not my 1 rep max deadlift anymore. It's like my 5 rep max deadlift or 10 rep max deadlift, like all these different things, but it's still more than I've lifted before. So that's the basic one that, everyone should be doing, in my opinion. Then we can go a little more detailed. So this is where you'd need the help of someone, or if you had, if you signed up to my app, you'd get the videos to show it, and you could video yourself and watch yourself doing the movements, so you could see improvements. Is to do a mobility assessment, a power assessment, or a fitness assessment. So where someone's running you through a battery of tests, and where the test method is fixed so that it's only you that's making the change. Like the control is the same. So you set up with your knees together, your bum on the chair, your hands here, you rotate like this. You do it before warming up. All these things are controlled. So the only thing that changes is your ability to do it or not. So that's where we do, all those different tests for mobility, etc. always best to have someone else do it because they're going to tell you the truth. They're not going to sugarcoat it because you're paying them to help you. And then the third method would be to go really in depth, and you can do like, you know, biomechanical stuff. And, you know, like Mark Bull has like biomechanic 3D where you can set up sensors on your body and look at different stuff. Or there's a system called the AXIT system where essentially you stand on a plate, or sort of like a force plate for golf, but this has got two different plates, and you'd do a squat on the plate and it would tell you whether you're leaning too far to the left or too far to the right based on weight distribution. So then you would know whether you're equally balanced, and then you can go back and start doing more unilateral or less unilateral training, and it will inform decisions even further. So it depends, one, on the investment you want to make and how much you care about it, and then sort of also what you have access to along the path. But sort of the app and tracking it is the bare basics, and everyone should do it. And then all the way up to the AXIT stuff and the force plate stuff, which is what, you know, is it Sahith Tagala? He won just recently.
Yeah, I just Googled it this morning, actually. I said he won the PGA Tour this morning, so I Googled it. Yeah. Yeah,
so there's, you know, all the videos and stuff of him on the PGA and on the MyTPI Instagram at the moment. And it's all him with like all the sensors all over his body doing swings and all this other stuff. So getting really good data. So, you know, up to elite level players doing that, that's sort of, that would be costing him a lot of money to do that, and he's got a lot to invest and a lot riding on it. But for us, it's sort of down towards the lower end, like having a coach, a fitness coach, a golf coach, swing coach, and also having an app to track progress over time, or a training buddy to help you with that too. But that would be my suggestions.
Yeah, I think, yeah, and and it also comes down to what your goal is in the gym. Is what I'm trying to get at there as well. I believe, like, what your goal is, what you're trying to get out of it as well, and then how you can measure that. And also, like, you know, at the elite level, we talk about like calibration of certain types of things, right? Certain types of you know, putting or golf swing, or we're moving quite well. You can do the same thing on a physical side of thing. Like when John Rahm goes to a tournament, then their number one focus is not hitting balls. It's just getting his body ready every time. So they screen and test and make sure he's moving properly every time, because he's done the work. He's done the work. And all they're trying to do, well, not all they're trying to do, but the main focus, what they're trying to get done when they go to the tournaments, and I've seen it, is just trying to get his body ready. And once they know he's moving correctly, he's going to play really well. And they kind of can gauge on how he's going to play by how he's moving. Like it's crazy, right? It's crazy importance. But anyways, for me, you know, it depends on, you know, people listening to this on what your goal is, or what your student's goal is to try and get them to. And if you can get them, if you're trying to get them to move in a certain way in the golf swing, and you're trying to get them to, you know, have to improve on, say, disassociation between upper body and lower body, and then they kind of reach that, and then you can start to work out, is it a physical issue, or is it a technique issue, or, you know, what are our capabilities here? So yeah, I think it's you know, I think it's really important to be measuring in all aspects we can. It doesn't have to be too crazy either. Like it can be just good, I believe. All right, can you tell me some misconceptions on golf fitness? Have you got any topics on this?
Oh, mate, how long we got left in this?
Have you got a couple that we can talk about?
Yeah, I'll give you, like, the first one is probably the one that, I've got two good ones. So the first one is one that people probably see all the professionals, you know, what a professional is doing currently, like watching the videos of JT and Max Homer and Sahith Theegala and Scotty Scheffler.
Yes.
You know, what those guys are doing in the gym is probably not what you should be doing in the gym. That's first and foremost.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Billy, my friend
sure,
Billy.
Sure there is some really, really good stuff that those guys are doing, which we could incorporate and maybe do some like slight variations of that exercise, like to make it a little simpler for you. But one thing that they have above all else is like the best testing facilities and the best numbers and measuring, so they can find out those 1%ers and 2%ers that they need to work on. And they've also spent the time doing the things I mentioned before. The unilateral training went into the bilateral training, and then they've gone into the rotational and power aspects as well. So these guys have a full day job of literally just doing a gym session, hitting some balls at the range and practicing, doing some interviews, and then going home to their families. So their whole life is dedicated to it. So what they do is not always what we should be doing, but we can take some parts of what they do, slightly change to make it beneficial for us. So that would be the first one. Don't just look to that and look at a workout online that shows that and think that's what I should be doing. Let's build some baselines first.
I agree. All right, next one. We have to go talk about that one.
Yeah, the second one, we could go all day. The second one is that strength training is going to hinder your golf swing. One, we have to define strength training. Strength training is different from hypertrophy training, is different from speed and power training. So speed and power, low repetitions, high output, long rest periods, doesn't make us sore. Strength training, low repetitions, heavy weight, doesn't make us too sore or very sore at all. Hypertrophy training, lots of reps, so 8 to 12 as a minimum or even higher, with a weight that's like 65 to 85% of what our max would be, and we're almost going to failure. Of those three training styles, hypertrophy is the one that makes us the sorest. Followed by strength, followed by plyometrics or speed and power work. If you are doing strength work, what we're doing there is a couple of things. One, we're getting stronger in our ability to move more mass and building core strength because we're supporting a load while we're lifting it. So back squat, deadlift, front squat, etc. So there's some element of bracing in our core to support the weight, plus holding the weight on our back or front or in our hands or whatever. And what we're also doing, as well as building strength, is because we're recruiting a lot of motor units in order to lift that weight because it's heavy, it's also making us faster. Despite us not actually moving more quickly, it's what's called overload training. And overload training is part of the formula in speed training for golfers. So if you're just doing speed sticks currently and you've reached a plateau, strength training is the element that's going to break you through that plateau because you're going to be able to recruit more motor units and more muscles to actually do the work. And it helps promote the growth of type 2 or type 2X or whatever the latest science is showing with the names of the muscle fibers. But essentially they're faster twitch muscle fibers. So strength work is not going to hinder your golf swing. It's going to help it in all these areas. So have some sort of element of it. And sorry, just to have one more little thing on it, just in case I didn't say this already, but if we're strength training through a large range of motion, then it's actually more beneficial for our mobility because we're moving through that range of motion and we're building strength through that range of motion, and it's forcing us into that range of motion. So if you had 100 kilos on the bar doing a back squat, gravity is going to help you get down nice and low. As long as you can control it and stand it back up for multiple reps, we'll be in a good spot. Obviously, don't put too much on it so it forces you down, you hurt yourself. That's the caveat there. Something that you can control. And the reason, especially with me, I don't like going to 1, 2, even up to 3 rep maxes for golfers is because the load gets too high and the potential for injury is more. We can still get a lot out of doing 4, 5 or 6 reps for strength work, and it's a load which is manageable. And if you're out of position or you're not too experienced with lifting, you're not going to really hurt yourself because it's a load that you can lift for multiple reps, so you can control it pretty well. Anyway, I could go on forever about this stuff.
Oh, no, I understand. There's strength training and there's bodybuilding as well, right? To kind of put it into explanation, when people see bodybuilders out there, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger, but one of recent, which is Phil Heath, right? Who won 7 Mr. Olympias in a row or something, or 8 Mr. Olympias in a row. If you actually, and he's this muscle man, right? People look at the bodybuilders and see these guys on stage at Mr. Olympia who are just completely they're blown up, they've been stung by a bee. They actually don't lift as heavy as you think. They're actually quite, they don't lift a lot. It's a lot of high reps, a lot of volume stuff, but there's nowhere near that. Their training is totally different to a powerlifter's training. It's completely different bodybuilding. So it depends on what. Well, I like what Shaun's talking about there, though, in regards to the lower rep stuff to not cause as much pain, because what these bodybuilders are doing is they're trying to break that muscle down as much as possible so it grows back bigger. Where with golf, we're just kind of building that strength, right? So I really like that. Have you got one more misconception for me?
what do we have? So we've had strength training. We've had don't do what the pros are doing.
What a, can I
And
suggest
then,
one? Can you?
yeah, go for it.
What about that? You have to do golf swing emulation exercises in the gym.
Yeah. So yeah,
That's
that's
false,
a good one
right?
too. Yeah, that's false, or in my opinion, it's false. Some people might have a
Yeah.
case for why it's true. So yeah, so with that, so the golf swing obviously requires certain elements. We're not going to get better at golf by just practicing the golf swing in the gym, because we're literally just going to be doing the same movement in the same direction all the time. That we would be doing in golf. We'd just weight it differently or use different implements to, be swinging around and doing some crazy stuff in the gym. What we want to do in the gym is to rebalance the body by doing unilateral type work. So training each side of the body so that we're moving away from the one side dominance and rotation of golf. So we're finding getting some health and some balance back in the body. Then we want to load it more. The reason we want to load the body more, so using heavier weights and even doing some hypertrophy work that I was talking about before to build some muscle, is if we build some muscle, then we have the potential to create more force and power. It's the exact reason they have weight classes in sports, because I'm not sure how heavy you are, but I think you're a bit smaller than me. I'm like 93 kilos.
Yes,
You're probably mid 70s.
no, I'm not. I'm
Yeah, or 80.
60, no,
Oh,
65.
it'd probably hurt
I'm only
more.
a jockey, mate. So I'm 5'6".
Yeah. Okay. If
Yeah.
we just to sort of elaborate on that point of
Yeah.
weight classes in sport, like if we were in the same boxing match, I have a longer reach and I have a potential for a lot harder punch than you, just because I have more muscle and mass behind it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
bro.
versus you. So that's why they have weight classes in sport. So if we want to, with your frame, make you better at golf, we need to increase your muscle mass a little bit. Yeah, and that's going to in turn just allow for you to create more power and speed in your golf swing, because you have more muscle mass in order to do that. So by just doing the golf swing over and over and over, one, we're going to overtrain that one side, and we're going to create so many imbalances and just be really unhealthy outside of the gym. But two, we're just not going to have the variation in movement to keep progressing over time. You're going to run into a wall and then you're just going to hurt yourself because you're going to try and lift more, because that's the only thing to do. So unilateral stuff, into bilateral stuff, into rotational. Yeah, if someone wants to know, literally sort of the formula to follow for, a lot of Americans are coming into, or Europeans are coming into their off season at the moment, how I would actually get these elements flowing all together. I've literally just launched a new off season program in the app, which has, a hypertrophy phase into a strength phase into a speed and power phase. So it's 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 weeks purely for an off season, or they can do 6 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on how long their winters are or off seasons are. But it will flow through all of that and just show you all the different exercises instead of just the swing to get you better for golf. Because we also have to think, if we, and this has been tested as well, this is a TPI thing that they studied, those with a greater vertical leap were able to swing the club faster and hit the ball further. You've probably seen this information, and you probably see it in your guys, right? So a middle-aged guy with who's a little bit overweight comes in, not very athletic. He can probably hit the ball maybe 150 to 200 meters. You have an ex-pro rugby league player, moves a little bit better, a bit heavier and more muscular, and just a bit more athletic, and they can probably hit it 250 to 300 meters.
Yeah.
It might go, a long way sideways as well, but the potential for the body there, just because they're more athletic and can jump higher and run faster and do all that stuff, it just translates to a better swing than someone who's unathletic. So
Yeah, I would agree.
yeah.
I would agree with that. So there's, as a whole. So I would say that people with an athletic background who come to me have an extremely good body pivot. So if someone comes to me, and I ask a lot of questions before a golf lesson, online or in person, and I can say to someone, I can tell you're a top end athlete before you came to me. In regards to their sport, because the way their body is moving. Doesn't necessarily mean that their arms and club structure are moving quite nicely, but their body and their ability to kind of tilt and turn quite well, you'll see that amongst athletes. So, and you'll see it amongst guys who go to the gym as well. People who go to the gym who have that kind of mind-body connection, and there is generally not a whole lot of like sometimes you see these people, there's not a weak spot, if you know what I mean. Like, oh, I'm really weak in this area. Everything is quite evenly spread amongst them.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
just a question
that's
on
really
that for
cool. I like
you.
that.
Who, so with that, like say they were both, 20 handicappers and you had that athletic person versus the non-athletic person, who would you say you can help make the faster progress with out of those two people if all you're
Oh,
doing is like a 1 hour lesson once a fortnight?
without a shadow of a doubt, it's the athletic person, without a shadow of a doubt. But
Yeah.
and the reason behind that is generally the barrier that's holding them back is the mechanic side of things. So I think all athletes can kind of move quite well. So we see cross references in athletes all the time, right? Like cross coding, like if it's from rugby league to boxing or whatever it is, Michael Jordan going into baseball, we see these athletes go in. So basically, when I get an athlete, if I can just teach them and educate them is a really strong word. Educate them on how to hold the club properly and what actually happens in the golf swing. There's a lot more conversation with an athlete of like, this is what needs to happen, guys. You need to be able to do this, this, and that, but you need to have this neutral grip and you need to not have the trail arm fold X. And I do a lot of that talking and visualization with them prior, and they usually just go,
Yep.
"Give me the club, I've fucking got this," and then they'll kind of get into it. So that's where a lot of the athletes go with for sure.
Yeah.
But there is extreme cases. I'm teaching a
Yeah.
professional rugby league player now, and he's got nothing. And what I mean by that, he's got nothing, is that he's a professional rugby league player, and to talk about it from a golf technicals point of view, he's just going over to, I won't give away too much because I just gave him a hard time about his golf, but he's just going overseas to play in the Super League now, and he starts his downswing like he's trying to shoulder charge or brace for contact. So when he takes his downswing from the top of his backswing, he's a right-handed golfer, so his lead shoulder, his left shoulder, really starts moving towards the target. So it tilts his spine in a negative manner towards the flag. And we all know that within the golf swing, once the upper body is out racing the lower body, as in the spine tilting forward and left shoulder going forward, the golfer's cooked. You're cooked. It doesn't matter who you are. So he has that issue. So,
Yeah.
mate, this guy could physically throw me over the 2-story house that's next to the driving range if he wanted to. He's the size of a house. But anyways, I understand what you mean, but definitely athletes for sure. And I get messages all the time. I gave one to a professional cricket player the other day, and he sent me a message after one lesson, and he just shot in the 70s. And he was an 85 player. And so I just kind of gave him the tools. You go, and it's gone well. All right, last thing, I want you to help us with this one here, guys. I want you to educate us on here. Last thing, tips to kind of stay motivated with your training, just from an exercise point of view, going to the gym, health and fitness.
So I would say there's two elements to this. One, you can do in the gym, and two, if you're a golfer looking to see the gym work that you do help with your on-course improvements, and that's track data. That's literally as simple as that. So one, with your gym work, if you've got a program, you've got a coach, you've paid for an app like mine where you've actually got the programs written for you, just track them. When you're doing the stuff, put in the numbers that you're doing, hit save. Next time you come back in, just try and do one more rep, one more kilo, whatever it is. Just try and just stack that on top of each other. And know that over time, as you slowly chip away and build on that, obviously you're going to start seeing some results on the golf course or start seeing some changes on the golf course. Two, so the second part to that is to be tracking what you're doing on the course. So, not just the general stats of, greens and fairways and all that type of stuff. You can probably teach us better stats to be following anyway.
Yeah.
But like distances of clubs, dispersion data, like how far you're missing it left and right. Are you warmed up by the third hole or doing your workouts and then a small mobility piece at the start of your game? You're on fire from the first hole, or you're starting to swing better from the first hole. So just finding little metrics for you that you want to see improve in your game or on the course, noting down what those things are, and then if you're actually making progress with them because of the training. And obviously then we've got some things where the reason I say having those things and outlining those things before you start is because we want to see them improve. And if we don't see them improve after 4, 6, or 8 weeks, then we know that something is going on with the actual program or the thing that we're doing. And then we can tweak it and change it and pivot to something slightly different. Try that again, and then, see if we make some progress there. But I think there's too much put down to not actually objective data for people. It's all like how they feel or how it felt. And it's how you feel is, can be a piece to it, but it's a very small piece because we're all very biased with how we feel, or our emotions will, if we shoot a bad score, but we actually had really good stats, you feel like you played like shit, but stat-wise, you're actually really good, and there's just one area that let you down. Like, you had 23 putts or something. Not that you can ever have 23 putts, but, you just played poorly on the greens.
Yeah, yes.
If you have two six putts, I suppose you could have 23 putts.
What about? Yeah, I like all that. And give me something in regards to what motivated you to start training and keep training and obviously get into this? Did you create habits to start off with, or do you just freaking love training, or what keeps you going?
Yeah, what keeps me going now is just what I'm saying there with the golf side of things. I'm measuring the stuff that I do on course, and it keeps me on track.
Yeah.
What initially kept me going, and the one reason I loved CrossFit was because they would standardize a movement. So they would say, in order for you to have a squat that counts or a deadlift that counts, we need to meet these points of performance. So we need to start from a fully locked out position. You need to squat down until the crease of your hip is below your knee, and then you need to stand up tall.
Yeah.
So we put a measure on fitness. So we put a measure on that. So then we could do heaps of things. We could go, cool, well, how many squats can you do to that standard within 60 seconds?
Yeah.
And then you could race yourself and try and beat yourself. And then we could say, cool, now you're going to hold a barbell on your back, and you're going to have 30 kilos or 60 pounds, whatever the weight is. And you're going to try and do as many of them as you can in 2 minutes. And you'll set a number, and then give it a few weeks of training, and then try it again, and you'll try and beat that score. So forming a little bit of gamification, or having yourself to beat, or a training partner there who is a similar standard to you, and having that there as an accountability partner, and someone who's going to show up on the days that you don't feel like showing up. And it's just done some weird like thing on
That's
there.
pretty cool, eh? Because you gave the thumbs up.
Yeah, I didn't see that before.
I've never.
Yeah, for those who are listening, they probably won't know what we're talking about, but some thumb appeared on the screen. But so having that accountability partner there who's going to help you show up on the days that you're not feeling like it, or you're not too motivated, and sort of help you and encourage you and push you through that. And then you being that for another person, or having a coach that you're paying to show up to PT sessions or classes in a gym. I believe you do classes in a gym, right? I owned a CrossFit gym, so people would pay me to do classes for them.
I train with some friends. I think, as one, I think for the people who, I think to help you keep motivated and to create the habit, we want to create the habit, right, of getting to the gym and exercising. It's don't go fucking 7 days a week to start off with. Just take it easy.
True.
Just go like 3 or 4 days a week. Don't push yourself too much to the point where you don't want to go and that you're kind of excited to go. And I love training. I love it. But if I've had a rough night with the kids and sleep and stuff, I just don't go in the morning because it's not conducive for me to go that day. But, for me, what kept me going was I made a commitment, and it was nothing too crazy early on. Just took my time and then became kind of obsessed with it. But, just kind of created that habit early, and then started to increase my load to the point where it wasn't like, I don't want to do that again because it was too hard. It was just kind of nice and cruising, and then I kind of got into it deeper.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so one of the things that we did with my gym over the years, we used to just have memberships where people would just sign up and they could train once or 10 times in a week, and it would cost the same, which is what a lot of gyms do. But we actually found so much more there was so much of a higher attendance and so much more ability to reach the goals that people set by setting attendance memberships. So we set up a 2-session, 3-session, and then a 4+ session a week. So essentially an unlimited classes a week. And then we would match someone's goal to whatever their membership option would be. So if it was someone just starting out, just looking to build a habit, just get into training, it's like, cool, we have 168 hours this week. What 2 hours can you give to your training, and what 2-hour-long things are you going to take away, or 2-hour-long things that you're currently doing? And people will be like, I'm like, well, cool, whip out your phone, show me what your Instagram usage is today. There's probably an hour there. So like doing like funny little things like that, sort of calling them out a little bit. But just setting aside those times, like, cool, bang, bang, 2 times a week is all I'm going to get started with. That slowly turns into seeing progress, which then fuels motivation to keep going because you want to see faster progress. And that can just snowball on itself to build up to someone who's, an absolute frother, a fanatic, sort of like you, I guess. And you just want to go to the gym all the time because you just love it. Love the way it makes you feel, love the way that it makes you perform outside, loves the way that it makes you a better dad because you're fitter and your cognition is better and you play better golf and you can give better examples to your students. And it all stems from that small habit that you've just slowly built over time.
Mate, good stuff. Good stuff, Shaun. It's been great. Mate, you are now, you're part of the community that's boosting the health expectancy of people's lives and not so much the life expectancy. And, hats off to you people who are doing that and improving people's health, because I think there's a big difference out there between health expectancy and life expectancy. And, we don't want to be taking pills all the way through our life to try and increase it. We want to be jumping around like Spider-Man and having fun on the golf course. So, mate, I really appreciate you coming on, mate. I think we've really educated listeners a lot. I like the way that we kind of mapped out this conversation today. And, lastly, mate, Shaun, you may as well do it. Where can people get you?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you, mate. I appreciate you having me on, and hopefully some things have resonated with people, and you get some messages to say that it's helped them get started on their health and fitness journey, or to take their golf training a bit more seriously, to see some progress in their health and golf game. Yep. But the best ways to reach out to me, if people have questions and anything else that has come up, they can reach me at my email, just Shaun@fairwayperformance.com. That's SHAUN for anyone listening. Not the old SEAN.
It'll all be below.
Yeah, and then Instagram, you can ask me questions on there, or I regularly ask questions to the followers that I have on there. Otherwise, if you want to get started with training, or want to learn more about the app, or give it a free trial for 7 days to see if it's worth the $15 a month that I charge for subscription to it, you can just search for the Fairway Performance app on Google or Apple Store. Jump in there. You can direct message me once you're set up and say that you listen to the podcast and you're keen to get started, and I'll point you in the direction of a program that'll help. Or like I said before, if you're keen for an off-season program and you've just gone into the colder months and you're doing a bit of swing coaching and gym work because you can't play on the course, then the off-season program would be a good start for you.
Yes, off-season. It's funny. I do a lot of online golf coaching. Right, obviously that's a lot of my work is coaching as well. It's not so much just lessons. I give coaching to people, worldwide, and we communicate a lot. After I got the phone call to you, I've got many conversations set up today with people around the world. But you talk about off-season. When it gets into summertime, our time, and it's Northern Hemisphere's winter time, it's crazy busy because everyone's getting ready to train off season. Everyone's getting ready in the Northern Hemisphere, and obviously here in summer, everyone's playing golf. So it's it's a really busy time for people who are in the online space and in the in-person space this time of the year coming up for us. Mate, Shaun, it's been great. Like I said, mate, you're contributing to the world and making the world a better place, because we need more people out there promoting health and fitness and, creating better, like I say, I like to use the term health expectancy over life expectancy. Thanks for coming on, mate.
Thank you, mate.